Hello everyone, my name is Alejandro and today I'll be presenting to you the Volkswagen emissions scandal, and I am presenting on behalf of my group, which includes Brian, Wilson, Remy, and Santiago. To kick things off, everyone knows Volkswagen. It's one of the world's most largest and influential automobile manufacturers, known for its brands such as Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche. According to research conducted by the International Council on Clean Transportation and West Virginia University, the company used hidden software to cheat US emission tests to make its diesel cars appear much cleaner than they actually were. And this comes from Angie Zhu's report from 2016. So, what exactly happened? Volkswagen installed this defeat device software that detected when a vehicle was being tested and temporarily lowered emissions to meet legal standards. During normal driving, however, these same cars would then pollute up to 40 times the legal limit, affecting millions of people and vehicles worldwide. Who are the stakeholders in this story, you might ask? Well, the stakeholders include the consumers who purchase these cars, environmental and public health communities, regulators such as the EPA and the CARB, investors and shareholders of the company, as well as Volkswagen employees who were directly impacted by the scandal. And as this comes from the Center for Ethical Organizational Cultures from 2017. Moving on to the next slide. Who is responsible for this issue? Volkswagen AG and its leadership team, including all the way to the top at the execs and all the way down to the bottom, the engineers who not only designed this software but also approved and concealed this defeat device that was used to manipulate emission results. And this info, again, was coming from the report from Angie Zhu in 2016. So who was affected by this? Consumers who were misled about this environmental performance of their cars. The public was exposed to harmful emissions. Investors suffered financial losses. Regulators' trust was damaged, and Volkswagen employees faced reputational and organizational consequences. And this stems from the Center for Ethical Organizational Cultures from 2017 as well. How does this story connect to this class? So, this story directly connects to this class by way of the stakeholder versus shareholder primacy, because in this instance, Volkswagen prioritized profits, sales, and market success over the general well-being of its stakeholders. The scandal demonstrates what happens when a company follows a profit-first mindset and neglects responsibilities to consumers, regulators, and the environment, as well as the society. This exact concept of the shareholder primacy versus stakeholders was, as I said, directly instituted in this class. And now let me explain on this next slide how this ties deeply into this class. The main ethical issue here is really structural. It comes down to the idea of shareholder primacy. Again, this belief says executives must focus on not only maximizing shareholder wealth, and everything else becomes secondary. When that's the mindset, a lot of ethical responsibilities get pushed to the side. And now a few thinkers from the course also help us make sense of why this situation happens. For example, Friedrich shows how shareholder primacy creates a culture where profit is treated like the only legitimate goal. And Stout as well adds that there isn't even one unified shareholder interest. Short-term traders and long-term investors want very different things, so the system ends up rewarding the short-sighted decisions. Next, Freeman talks about the separation fallacy, which is the mistaken belief that ethics and business operates in two different lanes. This often lets companies treat stakeholders as afterthoughts. Jackal then describes the moral pressures inside corporate bureaucracies. Managers feel they must protect themselves to avoid any and all blame, as well as please their superiors, often at the expense of what is actually right and ethical. And lastly, Bazerman and Ten Brunsel help explain how people fall into unethical behavior without noticing. Their ideas about motivated blindness and the slippery slope of how unethical choices gradually become normalized. Carrying on to the next slide, how is this issue beyond just one company and one story? So, a few concepts will help us paint this picture. First, shareholder primacy doesn't affect individual decisions. It can create large-scale social and economic problems. Stout connects this mindset to major scandals such as Enron and WorldCom, as well as including the 2008 financial crisis. In all of these cases, short-term gains were prioritized over long-term responsibility. Second, this encourages unethical behavior. Jackal's research on moral mazes show managers often act as based on what is pleased by their bosses and their careers, and simply what isn't right. And as well, Bazerman and Ten Brunsel's concepts like motivated blindness and the slippery slope, they explain how people can gradually become blind to wrongdoing and start normalizing questionable behaviors. Next, this mindset reinforces the separation fallacy. Freeman argues that business shouldn't treat ethics and profit as separate. When they do, they end up ignoring the needs of stakeholders, employees, customers, communities, and the environment. Finally, this raises deeper questions about what money should or shouldn't control. Sandel and Anderson warn that when everything becomes a commodity, we risk losing important human values like dignity, trust, and social connection. Moving forward, onto the next slide. Looking forward, the best way to prevent this kind of issue is to strengthen emissions testing and accountability. One option is shifting more testing to independent government agencies instead of relying on the manufacturers themselves. This idea builds public trust and makes it harder for companies themselves to manipulate their results. We could also create stronger consequences for executives or employees who knowingly take part in such unethical practices. When accountability is real and present, these chances of repeating these unethical behaviors drop. Of course, these solutions also come with trade-offs. For example, more testing could lead to higher compliance costs, recalls can damage company finances, and stricter rules could lead to higher prices. Plus, employees might feel more pressure with this increased oversight. So the challenge is balancing ethical safeguards with practical impacts on workers and the company as a whole. Moving on to the next slide. This issue affects the wide range of stakeholders. Workers face job insecurity and pressure to follow orders when they conflict with integrity. When consumers are put at risk and companies prioritize profit over safety and transparency. Regulators and government agencies get involved only after harm has occurred, which strains their resources. Long-term shareholders often suffer because short-term profit strategies undermine long-term stability. Communities and the environment bear the consequences of pollution or corporate misconduct. And finally, society as a whole pays the price when systemic problems like shareholder primacy lead to major economic or ethical failures. And now to our answer. One aspect that needs to be addressed further is Volkswagen's failures to consider all stakeholders in their decision-making process. As a result of them prioritizing their goal of becoming one of the largest manufacturers by 2018, they became more willing to seemingly incentivize the use of unethical and shady business practices in order to reach their monumental goal. In addition to their plan that seemed to place more of an emphasis on shareholders' interest, and as a result, not only were there unethical practices discovered, stakeholders who had no knowledge of said goal were not taken into consideration whatsoever, and when Volkswagen's plan was developed, everything was negatively impacted. Therefore, it would be best if Volkswagen's leadership was to take all stakeholders into consideration when developing their plan for the foreseeable future. Thank you all for listening, and thank you for your time.